Hello, and welcome to the show for the first one of 2026. It is January 7th. We took some time off over the break, and a lot happened since last we talked to folks. So we'll get into some of that tonight. A lot happened today, a lot happened this weekend, a lot has been happening. But we'll get into some of that. It's also 300 days out from Election Day. Feels really like way closer than it has at any point before. So we're excited to be here. I think there's a lot to talk about tonight. How are you feeling, Owen?
Yeah, you can't say Happy New Year, but you can say welcome to 2026. Welcome to election year for us and the team. So here we are.
Yeah. So, why can't we say Happy New Year? Is it like too late or something?
We could say it just hasn't been super happy. There's been a lot of negative crap going down that we'll get into. So, yeah, you can still look. I'm not canceling Happy New Year. You can still say Happy New Year.
I wasn't.
Year,
Thank you. Happy New Year, Owen.
Thank you.
I guess it's like this year is starting off in a way that really explains why it is important to do the work that we're doing. Because it feels like if we look around, everything has started the year real. And there isn't a good way out of that within the current system. It's like we can understand exactly what's happening in Venezuela. We can understand what might be happening in Greenland. We can understand what might be happening in Iran. We can understand what's happening in Palestine and the ICE shooting today and the other ICE shootings. And like, there's no way out of it in the current system. And, it feels like it is really urgent. And I think that it is really urgent, but that is why we need to do the work to change the way that political debates occur, to change the way that the political system works, because it is the system and its wiring right now that I think gets us to this place. So it is like a reminder after a couple days where we did get to say Happy New Year that the work is here, the work is real, and we got to get to it. So
absolutely. It's a reminder. Yeah, it's a reminder of why I'm a Green, why you're a Green, Andy, and we'll talk about how a values-based politics is what's needed rather than just a zero-sum power politics. Who has it? It should be about what's done with it and having a moral compass as to navigate these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to feed well into the guest we have tonight. The guest we have tonight is Matt Stannard. Matt has been involved in this campaign in one way or another for a very long time. He's a good friend and a longtime debate educator who helps to talk about the way that debate and deliberative democracy can help to shape the world that we want, the solidarity economy, the grassroots democracy, and all of the systems that we need to have the Maryland we deserve. So I think it's going to be a good show. Before everything happened, before everything started happening, before Venezuela happened, before the attack on Venezuela, the most recent eruption of attacks on Venezuela, we'll talk about how it's been ongoing. Before that happened, before this iteration of an ICE shooting, we had this show planned out because we're like 300 days out, and like we were going to talk about some of the stuff, a lot of the work that we've done to get the infrastructure of the campaign ready and things like that. But events interrupted some of that, and we're going to talk about those events. What I do think, though, is that because we're 300 days out, the General Assembly session starts next week, and we're in the year of the election, we're really shifting our focus from campaign infrastructure, hunkering down in the winter or that type of thing, to offering a policy and politics focus on Maryland, on things that connect to Maryland that happen around the globe. And so I want to go through a couple things that we've been working on and have to unveil tonight. And then we'll get into the discussion about Venezuela, ICE, and how we debate for a civil society that works better. So
yeah, it seems like a technical pivot, but it's a pivot from how are we going to do this to we're doing this, and we're having an impact. So it's a great pivot to be making.
No, and it's the right time. Next Wednesday, we'll be going down for the General Assembly session in Maryland. We'll have a former General Assembly member who is for a short time agreeing on the show. And so I think there's a lot of good stuff to talk about. And I think it's important that if we build this machine to talk about politics and policy from a different perspective, we actually talk about politics and policy. So before we get to that, though, I do want to show one of the things that we're rolling out today that I'm pretty excited about, which is a place on our website where folks can invite us to come to stuff. So we've been doing a lot of events all over the state over the last couple of years. We've been to farmers markets, fairs, festivals. We've seen people's communities. We've seen people's workspaces. We've seen protests. We've seen government meetings. We want you to be able to tell us when those things are happening and you want us to come out to them. So that our event schedule this year is not just where we want to go, but where you want us to go, where you think there's a story that needs to be told, where there's folks that you think need to hear this message. So if you go to gogreen.com, invite us, gogreen2026.com, invite us. It has this page up there, and it's real simple. You don't got to fill out a form or anything. Just send us an email with what your idea is. We'll get back to you, and we'll go to where you are. And I know you did a little bit of this at the end of last year, Owen. And I think that was some of the inspiration for this.
Yeah, we'll show up. We'll answer questions. We'll talk. We'll listen. We're not just there for the photo op or the cameras. We really want to build with you and listen to your concerns and share what we're doing. And so this is kind of it's a big statewide campaign, but there's a small scale, there's a human scale to it, whether, I'm looking forward to a barn party in Southern Maryland later this year. We're going down to the Leonardtown Library, right? So these are some events that we set up, but we also like showing up to events that you're doing, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things we have. We also have some new events that are coming. If you go to our events page, you'll be able to see there that, there is a whole bunch of stuff that Owen just mentioned that's starting to come up, and we'll be there for the spring. Always be willing to check this page out, gogreen2026.com events. We'll keep it updated regularly. And also invite us to your living room, your local library, and wherever else the sign says. So the next thing I want to talk about is we unveiled a new piece of our policy platform today. And I call it the sort of civic engagement platform. And that's going to be a lot of some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight. So you can go to gogreen2026.com, civic engagement. And it talks about how we hope to return power to the people, create a culture of democracy, create a culture of deliberation, and create a culture of debate throughout the state of Maryland. So, I'm not going to read it all to you right now, but some of the policy proposals that we're looking at are universal debate education in public schools, debate programs at public colleges, community colleges, and universities, real intentional deliberative town halls that let folks get connected with their elected officials and actually have participatory and deliberative dialogue that's good. We want to double the state library budget. We think libraries are a great space of this kind of interaction that we need. And we have a policy to double that budget so that the libraries can do more stuff. We want to bring participatory budgeting to state and local government. We will also want to create programming like this that doesn't just occur on our YouTube channel, but can occur on Maryland Public Television, for example. We think Maryland Public Television has a great opportunity right now to re-embrace democracy and to represent more Marylanders. And we'd love to be able to have party-based programming about policy and politics and theory on Maryland Public Television. And then we think we need some citizen assemblies where people get together and propose their ideas and things like that. So you can go check that out, gogreen2026.com, civic engagement. A bunch of policy proposals there. As with all of our policy proposals, it's a work in progress, and you'll be able to see more about it over time. So what do you think about some of that stuff, Owen?
Yeah, I think a lot of this doesn't fall along the traditional red, blue, left, right lines, because it's not about more power to politicians. It's about more power to the people. And that's not what we see in day-to-day Democratic or Republican politics. So I think it's really refreshing. And, you might not think of some of these as your top most urgent pressing issue, but rather these are the ways that we debate, that we flesh out, that we build coalitions and restore our sense of civics so that we can achieve those other top priorities.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for some people, it is their biggest issue. I'm reminded of multiple conversations that we've had at tables and events where parents will come up and they will be asking for some activity that their kid can engage in. They may not like band, they may not like sports, and often simultaneously complaining about how there's a lack of civics education and things like that. Now, some of those complaints are not necessarily rooted in modern, curriculum practice or whatever, I think is a fair way to say that. But aside from that, I think having debate education in every elementary, middle, and high school from Cumberland to Cambridge or from, Berlin to Bowie is a way of addressing those needs, is a way of addressing those after school program needs, and is a way of addressing the desire of parents and students and teachers to have more civic education.
I agree. Very exciting.
And double the library budget. It's convenient. The library budget's about $100 million a year. I think we already identified a good place to double it from, and all those subsidies that we pay to the horse racing industry. So, you heard it here first.
Yeah, much love for the librarians all across Maryland. My first job after school in high school was at a library. And these are, as many other spaces where people can get together in public that don't involve capitalism directly wither away. We see libraries as increasingly essential. Sometimes they're being asked to do too much, right? But doubling their budget would allow them to meet that challenge.
Yeah. So check it out, gogreen2026.com, civic education or civic engagement. First of many policies that we're going to be unveiling in this part of the year of 2026. So we'll have some new ones coming and some regular cadence as the General Assembly session starts. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the debate bill. You've heard us refer to it a bunch of times as the debate bill, and it is a bill that would require public broadcasters in the state of Maryland to include all ballot certified candidates in statewide debates. We're going to
keep their funding.
If they want to keep their funding, right? So they don't have to do it. They can choose. They can choose not to do it. But if they want to be funded by taxpayer dollars in the state of Maryland, they have to include all candidates in any debates that they run. So this bill is being introduced by Delegate Gary Simmons, a Democrat from Anne Arundel County, who also has a big belief and faith in the power of civics and dialogue in order to bring better outcomes and bring better democracy. It'll be introduced next Wednesday when the General Assembly session starts, and we're going to be talking about it a lot between now and when hopefully it gets passed and Governor Moore signs it, because we think it's a piece of common sense legislation that is good for democracy because more voices get to be heard on the stage. It is good for Maryland Public Television because more viewers will turn in if they see themselves represented in that. And it is good for Maryland because it helps us to have multiple perspectives on the complex issues that are facing us today. So we will talk plenty more about it later in this show. We'll talk about it with Matt later, but this is a piece of real legislation that is really going to be introduced in the Maryland General Assembly next week to address one of the biggest barriers third parties face when they're trying to, make the case that we need to have a different kind of system.
Yeah, and public media is certainly under attack by the right-wing federal government, and this is an opportunity for them at the state level, not just in Maryland, but states look at what each other are doing. This is an opportunity for public media to innovate at the state level, to expand their audience, and to push back against the narrative that they favor one party, because we're saying they favor two parties. And this is their chance to put all parties that the State Board of Elections has certified as participating in the general election on the debate. And just hearing issues debated from multiple perspectives, if you watch that 3-person debate for New York City mayor, it's just more interesting. You really have to think through the issues. You have to defend your position from multiple angles, and it's not just the same old, same old.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think there's plenty of examples that we can talk about that are abstract examples, but I think there's some examples tonight that we want to get into of where multiple perspectives and multiple political perspectives on world events can change the way that the debate goes down. So, um, I think we all are aware at this point that over the weekend the United States attacked Venezuela, abducted their leader, and killed a bunch of people in the process as part of a military operation that has been going on for months, and as part of a larger campaign against the Venezuelan government that has been going on for years. And so I think we kind of had not been talking about issues like this. We have been saying that is foreign policy and things like that. But it is very important that these kind of activities to understand what's happening, and B, it's not disconnected from what happens in Maryland. So, Owen, I know you have a lot of thoughts and some really good experience talking about this. So I want to, sort of have you lead us through this part of it.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. I think this is a really painful and disturbing policy that the Trump administration is enacting. And I come at this as someone who studied Latin American policy and history at University of Maryland. And some of my first protests were related to the Obama-backed coup in Honduras, right? Really, this reminds us that U.S. imperialism is bipartisan. And we've seen that in the responses from Democrats too. And it's really about, why didn't you consult us before you killed dozens of people, or hundreds of people if you include the terrible murders on the boats in the previous weeks? And what an immoral and unethical and valueless critique of this murderous policy. Why didn't congressional Democrats saying that they're mad because they weren't included on the hit? That is, it's really hard to wrap your head around it from an ethical perspective. And it's because they're not challenged from an anti-imperialist perspective that they just kind of fall in line very meekly and fall back on these procedural issues, which when they're in power, they also violate.
Yeah, and I think Delegate Stephanie Smith had a post the other day that said something like, if they had consulted the Democrats in Congress, they would have agreed. And I thought that I don't know what her intention with that post was, but I thought it very clearly stated that the Democrats aren't here to be in opposition to this. They're here to complain, that they weren't consulted. And then the line that I started hearing emerging recently is they didn't even take out the Maduro regime because the vice president is still there. And it seems like the logical conclusion of that argument is that they thought the Trump administration should have done more destabilizing regime change like they did in Libya. And it's really stunning how bad their arguments are on this. And I think it's because of what you said. They're not coming from a position of morality. They're not coming from a position of ethics. They're coming from a bipartisan political jockeying and from a position of efficacy. I don't even know where they're grounded.
Yeah, they are very much a part of U.S. hegemony in the Western Hemisphere, around the world. And the Democrats' position is to maintain U.S. dominance, and they are in lockstep. They might not like some of the vocabulary or the exact timing, or the fact that they weren't included on the details, but for the most part, Democrats in power are not protesting the murder of people in Venezuela, the murder of people in the Caribbean. And it really shocks me that we have to say this, but killing people is bad. Stealing oil from another country is bad. Waging years-long economic warfare through sanctions is bad. Meddling in the democratic process and the elections of other countries is bad. These things are wrong, and the US government should not be engaged in them. But that is not part of the conversation, and it's really, really disturbing.
Yeah, and it's like, I think the three arguments that I've heard is we weren't consulted. Let's see, we weren't consulted. You didn't really do enough regime change. But I think the other one would sort of be like this, well, you're surely going to destabilize the government by this. And none of those are based on whether it is right or wrong. And I think it's really important to have a sense of ethics and morality when we approach this question. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about what the consequences of this are. There are real material consequences to the hundreds of people who have been killed, to their families, to the economy that has been crushed. But without a grounding in some ethics or some morality, like, these just become vacuous political arguments that are meant to win votes. And I think people see through it.
Yeah. And there's no alternative, right? Ben Rhodes who is Obama's, one of Obama's national defense folks, cited his own policy position on Libya, as you mentioned, Gaddafi, and said, this is going to be harder than you guys think, Trump administration. It wasn't, that was a mistake. Destabilizing Libya was a mistake, or we had a different policy. It was, this is going to be harder than you guys think. And if that's the best they can do as an opposition party, then there need to be more opposition parties.
Yeah. And I think that there's this other piece of it that is like, I've heard people saying things like, well, there's precedent for this because we went and got Noriega. And it is like, well, yes, we did. And then that was part of the reason that an international movement for an international criminal court that would adjudicate these things with international law and enforce them via the UN and versus countries in cooperative agreement came about. So it's like the precedent for this particular type of thing spurred a movement for an international court that neither party has been willing to embrace because A, they feel like it would hold them accountable, and B, they feel like it would stop them from being able to do this kind of operation because they'd have to take it to the international court. And so it's like when people say, yes, well, Noriega gave us precedent. Sure, he did. And it's bad precedent. It's bad and unethical. And it's like, we don't want to live in a world where, like, this is just in some ways, this is the most naked, transparent, and aggressive version of this type of policy that I can imagine. And I think that's part of the shocking part of it. But it's not new. It's a long history of, there's a reason that Trump is citing the Monroe Doctrine, right? Like, none of it's new. And so I guess one of the questions that I would say, though, is like, it's not disconnected from Maryland. Like, let's talk about the way that what happens in Latin America, what happens in Venezuela affects what happens in Maryland.
Right. Well, I think one way that there's a connection between Latin America and Maryland is through forced migration, what has been called the harvest of empire, right? That is folks who's living in countries in Latin America where the U.S. has destabilized the economy, either through neoliberal trade deals like NAFTA and CAFTA, through military operations like we just saw, or the one in Panama, or through funneling money to armed groups, whether they be state or non-state actors, often worsening the violence related to the drug trade, which is caused by the demand for drugs within the U.S. And so it was really interesting. One of the local outlets, I think it was the Baltimore Banner, said something about, because of the economic troubles in Venezuela, thousands of people have left. No, it's like 8 million, right? I mean, it's as if 20%, it's the equivalent of about 25% of the country leaving. And so in the US, we're talking about 60, 70 million people. And this is a crisis in part caused by and there's commodity drops that happened in the middle of the last decade, but there's also a bipartisan policy of sanctions that were levied on the Venezuelan government and have been levied on other progressive left-wing governments across Latin America. There's been an embargo on Cuba, for decades. And that is one of the things that forces people to leave their countries when they cannot make a living, because the biggest economy in the world has made their economy suffer. They leave and they come to the US. And so it's really hypocritical for people like Stephen Miller to be involved in this, who's so draconian on immigrants, when these actions over many years are one of the root causes of forced migration.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a place where you have a lot of experience, like where your activism work has been. And so I know we were on the Left-Handed Leftist pod this week, and you talked about this a little bit, but do you want to sort of draw that connection out for folks?
Just more kind of politically coherent act of civil disobedience was traveling to Cuba in 2009 with the Venceremos Brigade. And we marched, we flew in and out of Canada, because at that time, direct flights from the US weren't really a thing for most people. And we marched back across the International Peace Bridge back into Buffalo and declared at customs that we had been to Cuba. And as a result of that, and as a result of decades of international solidarity and Cuban solidarity specifically, a few years later, the Obama administration changed their policy and opened up relations to some degree with Cuba, although there's been backsliding since then. So I think the thing I want to emphasize there, and with some of the other examples that I'll give, is that even when we do feel kind of helpless to stop some of these, atrocities from happening, that direct action and long haul organizing do lead to improved outcomes for peoples across the hemisphere and around the world. And, following that, I got involved with School of the Americas Watch and the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. I was on staff for both organizations when I was living in DC. And these were organizations, when we think about the generations that came before us, they were really kind of boomer founded, Gen X run organizations, nonprofits that were on the fringes of the nonprofit complex in DC, influencing policy, introducing, I got my first advocacy lobbying experience working for School of the Americas Watch. We had a bill in the House of Delegates that was introduced every year by Jim McGovern to close down this base that was training Latin American soldiers. And that these organizations still exist, but they're in a more skeletal form. And part of that is the natural ebb and flow of movements. Energy went elsewhere. But I think when we wonder how we got to the point where the governments of Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil are all, left-leaning governments, and yet we have a far-right government raining down murder and kidnapping on Latin America, in part, we have to look at our movement formations and our established organizations and wonder how we can kind of rebuild the Latin American solidarity movement, which I was involved with kind of at the tail end of it to some degree. And that means localizing it and connecting it to immigrant solidarity. As we discussed before, I think these two are very closely interconnected: local direct support and direct aid and solidarity with our immigrant neighbors, and policy advocacy and mass mobilization directed at changing U.S. foreign policy, or at least mitigating it to some degree, to give space to the organizers in Latin America to do their thing.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, right after you got home from work, about this ICE shooting in Minnesota today, and you said that you hadn't had enough chance to see, and I don't think it's actually helpful for you and I to weigh in on the TikTok of what's happening right now, or to comment on Jacob Frey's words or whatever. I will note that Wes Moore, who's the governor of Maryland and we are running against, was on CNN talking about the shooting of ICE by ICE agents in Minnesota today, but he wasn't on even the local news when there was a shooting here a couple of weeks ago. So talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, there was a shooting by ICE of at least one immigrant, and they might have unnecessarily harmed another immigrant who had been arrested in Glen Burnie, so close to where I work every day, and it was really frightening. And the silence, or at least the lack of outrage by Governor Moore and Runa Miller was pretty upsetting. I mean, the response was kind of a cop response, like we are monitoring the situation, rather than they just federal agents just shot someone in our state and tried to probably cover it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's interesting that when it happens here, it is not an opportunity for him to make the same kind of statements that he just made to Jake Tapper on CNN. And, you know, he sounded strong and credible on this issue. But the question is, what are you doing when it happens here? And the answer is siding with the police or siding with ICE. You know, and, you know, I think it's also, you know, there's going to be a lot of fixation on these 287G agreements as it comes to immigration in the General Assembly next year. And I think there's a lot of people who, while they recognize those are important, think that the real question at this point is like, what do we do to stop ICE from coming into our communities and shooting people? How do we protect against that? And how do we provide solidarity and safety for the people who are here? And so, I don't know, we will surely talk about immigration a lot during the course of the General Assembly session. And I think it's like, it's a good reminder today when I was like, how do you want to talk about this thing that just happened? And you're like, I've been at work all day. And so for many of us, I think we watched as it happened in the afternoon, and we saw and we were following. And I think before I talked to you, I was really like, I just was feeling the weight of the moment. And, you know, I think we can figure out how to talk about this. I think we can figure out what policy solutions need to happen. I think we can figure out what movement solutions need to happen in Maryland so that ICE isn't coming here next and continuing to shoot people. I think in the short term, I think that's pretty likely if they want to, because just like in Venezuela, there's no Democratic Party check on this. There is performative outrage sometimes, but there's not much material check on their ability to kill people in a law enforcement operation because they say so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the killings and kidnappings will continue until a social movement. It's going to take more than state government, although state government can choose to either be an ally of social movements or a barrier to those social movements. Those are going to continue until we build a movement that's strong enough to stop them. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a lot. And I'm really glad that we got to talk about it, because I think it's important to make these connections. And I appreciate the way that your experience sort of helps to shape our response on this. And I do think it is connected to the things that we're talking about. And so with that,
I mean, just to say, it's connected to why we're Greens. That's the last thing I want to say on this is I am a Green because I'm against violence. I'm a Green because one of our 4 core pillars is peace and nonviolence. And neither of the major parties are against violence, right? They enacted it and then condoned it. And when they're in the executive, they do the exact same thing. They go around, Democrats go around Congress to kill people around the world and to start wars and overthrow governments. So I'm a Green. I'm running as a Green because of our commitment to peace and nonviolence.
Right. We are for peace because we are against violence. We are for peace because we're against colonialism. Right?
And that shouldn't be a radical political position. But in the United States, you are far outside the political mainstream of elected officials and candidates if you are running against violence and the state's use of violence domestically and internationally.
Yeah. And I think it's worth, one last thing I will say on this is like, part of the reason that I'm a Green is because of police violence at home. And I think it is really interesting to note that the way that this was framed in order to get around the process arguments was that it was a law enforcement operation, which shows that Trump and many of the Democrats think law enforcement operations are about killing a bunch of people, as we saw in Venezuela and as we saw today. So I think it's really important to remind that we are here because we believe in peace, we believe in democracy, we believe in justice, and we believe in ecological wisdom. And those things are not represented by the two-party debate that we have right now, and by the two parties and the way that that goes down. So I think that is a good segue to our guest tonight. I think Matt's here. We'll see if his camera is working. I see him backstage, but our guest tonight is Matt Stannard, who is a debate teacher and coach. He's a community organizer and a trainer of advocates. He has taught debate in 5 different countries and assisted in several political and issue-based campaigns throughout his life. You can learn more about what he does and where he does it on his LinkedIn profile, which we will share in the show notes. And with that, I want to bring Matt Stannard on. Hey, Matt, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm sorry. This isn't the NBA Locked On Clippers podcast. I'm a little confused.
No, it's not. But I will say good transition there.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we needed to lighten things up a little bit. Thank you.
I appreciate you for no, it's not the Locked On Clippers podcast.
That's too bad. I had a lot of notes about how I think that things are really turning around for them. Even though they've had some injuries, but that's all right. Yeah,
what am I supposed to say here? I'm not going to read all that, so I hope that worked out for you, or I'm sorry that happened to you.
That'll work, yeah.
So, Matt, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I know you caught some of the conversation that we were having in the background, and I know that like some of these topics are part of the reason that you do the work that you do too. It's not just us Greens, it's DSA guys like you as well who are driven by some of this stuff.
Well, Owen was talking about going to Cuba, and so many, people that I'm close to have gone, and it is, definitely at the top of my list. But what that brought to mind for me is that one of my early organizing experiences at a very grassroots level was in Salt Lake City, helping with the caravans that were going to Cuba and were at one point stopped at the border in Laredo, and there was an entire campaign and building of movement around the caravanning itself, around the supplying of the caravan. And so to be a part of that, even in Utah, very far away from Cuba, and maybe never, going there myself, but still being part of that connectivity, I think was an early experience about solidarity in terms of kind of showing that, when you're doing organizing, you're really able to, if you're doing it right, you're able to bring in so many participants across, even geographies. And so I think that that's important in this moment too, as we were talking about sort of the disconnect you were talking about in terms of, maybe, when a politician, sort of is quick to speak about, something going on in Minneapolis, and maybe ignoring what's going on kind of in their own backyard. So I felt all, just instantly when I came in, a real connectedness to a lot of what you all were talking about.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm glad. And I think it's a great night to have you on, actually. I think any night would be a great night to have you on, but this one, I think in particular, is really useful. And so I want to get into some of the conversation about debate, civic education, civil engagement, and start with this. You've taught debate at every level, high school, college, internationally. How did all this start for you, and what's the story of the journey?
If you're wondering whether teaching elementary school students how to debate is adorable, the answer is it is. So I've even taught, at the elementary level, and in fact, we'll be starting another elementary class this semester, just starting next week. And so Yeah. And so I'm sorry, what was the original question?
Let me say, you taught debate at every level: middle school, elementary school, high school,
Yeah.
college, and internationally. How did it all start for you? What's the
How
journey?
did it all start? Yeah. So in 8th grade, I took a speech class, and Ms. Davis was, kind of a, one of those, really memorable kind of mentorish teachers for many, many, many people for a long, long time, where I grew up in, near Salt Lake City. And she told me that I should get into debate after a particular speech that I gave, where I was unable to pick a side, even though I was supposed to pick a side. And she told me that she thought that I would enjoy debating, and so the next year I did it. I did it alongside wrestling, but then I got hurt wrestling, and so I decided that I was going to stick with debate.
Yeah,
ways to wrestle, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I, and still have a lot of love for the sport of grappling, but preferred the lower contact form.
I have a similar story, but I wasn't actually like on the team. When I got to high school and got recruited to be on the debate team, I also wanted to try out for the tennis team. And I did definitely try it out. So I think that I was better at debate from an early age than I was at tennis. I could play tennis with my family, but like when I was playing against, other people in a competitive form, I turned to debate. So
you chose a volleying of a different kind.
I did. We were just going to be here with these sports metaphors.
With the debate to sports metaphors. It's great because as students introduce themselves in class and they say, yeah, and I do this, and I'm like, oh, that's like debate.
Yeah. So, that's how you started. So, like, talk about like college, talk about coaching, talk about the international work a little bit, because I think that international piece like is really relevant as we're thinking about the way that this can be part of building a different kind of democratic institution.
I did do other activities in high school, but debate was sort of the foundational and kind of anchor activity. I had a couple of choices in terms of college scholarships, and did some, because I had done some theater, and my sort of home in debate and forensics and speech was always at that sort of juncture of debate and theater. But decided, that the going the debate route made a lot more sense. And then almost immediately was drawn into coaching and teaching, which I think so many students, really get a lot out of that. And to many, not me at first, but to many, I think the teaching almost immediately begins to eclipse their competitive desires in debate. They want to teach other people how to debate, or they want to take debate back into their community. I felt like all of those things, and then also vocationally, it made a lot of sense. And then, as there were, for a while, I coached for a while. I got out for a while. During that time in my career, I did sort of the whole rounds of the nonprofit industrial complex, but also a lot more direct organizing, a lot more kind of starting up small groups, starting up grassroots groups, and then also some media work for larger organizations, and did that for, almost a decade. And then said, you know what, I really miss debate. I really miss debate coaching. And I even went to law school, again, not with necessarily the intent of being a litigator, but wanting to, be a better activist and better organizer, and better public facing, kind of do-gooder, through having a JD and through doing things like statutory construction and stuff. And so I did that for a long time, and then just decided that I missed debate too much and missed that educational aspect too much.
Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that trajectory.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how important debate is from the standpoint of teaching. What are some of the most important things that debate teaches us or teaches debaters?
Mhm. I think that that one theme that has been on my mind a lot, and I know has been on y'all's mind a lot, is the difference between good debate and what often passes for debate in the public sphere or in fiercely ideological kind of organizations like TPUSA, who kind of bring this sort of spectacle debate and stuff like that. And so I think that there's important differences which I would like to continue to talk about and periodically go back to as we talk. But I think in this instance, I think the difference is that good debate is dialectical, and that means that it understands that there is that there are more than two sides to a question, and that even if you begin with nominally two sides on two sides of a question, where you end up is going to invariably be very different from where you began. And it is much more like going, through a dialectical process of struggle and contradiction of opposites, and then higher forms of thinking and higher orders of thinking and speaking and doing and action as well. And so to me, that's the key to debate as an educational device. It's the key to its critical thinking. It's the key to I think even the key to its teaching to be an effective rhetor or effective speaker and communicator is this understanding that that it's more than that. Life is more than just a series of binary statements. And I think debate teaches you that, again, if you're teaching it right, and if you're doing it right.
Yeah.
I would add the other thing that is increasingly valuable about debate, and I'm not the only person saying this, is that the kind of performativity that it demands of making an argument is emerging as an alternative to things like essay writing and other things that can be faked now, or can be rented out to AI, which is causing a great deal of kind of pain in educational spaces right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we'll get back to that in a bit. But I want to talk. I want to build on what you were saying about the sort of dialectical nature of it. And so the bill that we're supporting this year in the General Assembly would require all ballot qualified parties to be in candidate debates if public television wants to continue receiving its public funding from the state. Why do you think that election debates that only have two parties are the norm? Is the first part of that, and what does it do to our politics to have political debate reduced to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are really very, very specific reasons that are tied into the agenda setting of the existing power structures. That's the bottom line is that, and I think we've known each other for a long time, and I think that both of our views around the two-party system and stuff, I think, have evolved. I think that we all want to move beyond these very kind of facile debates. Are you saying there's no difference? Clearly there are differences in parties. That's why there are different parties, right? And clearly, people make different choices and have different rationales for their politics. But all of that said, the basic agenda, the sort of meta agenda that the two parties represent, is one that is very homogenous on really serious foundational questions. And I think that is why what we might call bourgeois politics favors these sort of either or kinds of questions. I don't think that that's good debate. I, as a debate educator, don't think that that's good debate. And the best examples I see both in and out of the classroom in terms of debating always go beyond those particular binary questions. And the worst examples always kind of stick to them and enforce them in ways that don't produce good discourse, good politics, or good education.
So sort of on the flip side of that, how could including more parties, more candidates in the debates address that?
I think that I will say at the outset that if you merely just include more candidates in the debate, there you might get some marginal increase in, kind of, that opening up those spaces, those critical spaces. But I think that that's not enough. I don't really think that's enough. I think that you also want to be able to, reframe questions ultimately, and change the nature of how, maybe in some ways how the debate is conducted. But I think that, for example, reframing questions that are more based on, kind of true stakeholder needs and what communities really need, or reframing those questions, in terms of, I think about this a lot in distinction to the way that these campus events, these debate me bro kind of campus events are. But I also think that it's true in terms of the agenda setting of how we ask questions in these candidate debates as well. What's the best way to solve this problem versus, kind of forcing candidates to take either or positions on, very assumptive kind of political questions. And, even things like, how we might frame foreign policy debates for candidates. Anytime you see any public debate in the mass media or on, on debate stages during elections, you always see, these very, how a little war or a lot of war? Is it, a little bit of this terrible thing, or is it a lot of this terrible thing? Which is, I remember, this is a long time ago, but I remember noting kind of to myself that in 2016 and 2015, 2016 candidate debates, that, that I was noting the number of times, for example, that Bernie was the only candidate on the stage that mentioned Palestinians in any way that implied humanity, or, implied that there were basic questions of justice involved in Middle East politics. And I think, again, it shouldn't be up to a few people kind of going against the grain in those contexts. I think that having more candidates and more parties represented, I think, can also be a gateway to resetting the agenda of the call to question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think it's like, a lot of times if you watch, and I've been looking at Steve Yano's book about presidential debates a little bit. We're going to try to get him to come on at some point. But one of the things that
he's a hoot. Have you been on his show?
I have not, but we will make it happen.
Yeah.
I talked at the end of the year, and I started
he's
looking
great.
at
Yeah.
So one of the things I think about this sometimes is like, sometimes it is a debate between, like, if we look at foreign policy debates between Trump and Harris, for example, they feel very much like, are we going to have technocratic imperialism? Or are we going to have crude imperialism? Mm-hmm. Right? And it is like, okay, what if we challenged imperialism at its root and had somebody on stage that was saying both of these folks, for all their differences, agree that the United States should be the imperial power in the world. And we think that we need to start with a position of peace. And it is just so missing from those debates. And in some ways, I was having a conversation with somebody recently who was on the Republican side of the aisle, and I was saying it will be good for me to be in the debate with you. And they were saying, well, no, it wouldn't be good, because then I can't call Wes Moore a raging communist. Right? And it is like, and I think just the mere presence of a different ideological perspective on that stage creates more possibility of plural outcomes, and
I agree.
Having a predetermined outcome.
I absolutely agree with that. I do think that something else that I would say, kind of from in terms of data around that, would be that I think that the primary debates in national elections are often much more interesting, right, than the final debates between the candidates, because at least you have some kind of ideological or other assumptive variance between those various candidates. There's there's going to be your centrist Democrats versus your left Democrats, whereas the amount of space even I think in a debate between Trump and Harris, or Trump and Hillary Clinton, the amount of actual material space is pretty small. The discursive space is really large, and I'm not saying that's not important, but I think that in terms of reforming politics and in terms of increasing access and deliberation, it's very important to note that there's really only about a dime's worth of difference in the debates themselves.
Yep, totally. And so I want to move beyond. I think we could spend the whole day talking about this, and there will be plenty of time to talk more about those. But I want to move beyond that a little bit. And we've just put out our civic engagement policy today, and it has universal debate education in Maryland public schools from elementary, middle, high school, community college, and university. What are the limits and possibilities of an approach that has the state say that everybody should have access to debate in their education?
I think that that's so important. I think that the starting point of that is public funding and a public model, and sort of a public expectation of that. And I think I just think that in and of itself is extremely important. It says, particularly from, I'm in addition to, in terms of civic advocacy, it also from the perspective of being a debate educator, it says that, that this is a public project, not a project that we will have to continuously chase down philanthropic funds for and sort of, kind of grovel, at the feet of various interests that may not have the, actual open discourse and open deliberation, and critical deliberation in particular, as its, as its sort of foundation. And I mean, I think that, I have nothing against organizations that have managed to leverage that support to do amazing things, to do really, to do a lot of good. But I think even then, I think that a lot of the philanthropic approach kind of says, well, debate is great because it trains the next CEO, or it trains the next, big leader, and everything. But if you, talk to a lot of the students, particularly like urban debate students and everything, they'll tell you fairly unprompted that one of the main reasons they want to debate is to go back and help their communities and to be better leaders, certainly. But I think that their notion of leadership is very different, I think, than the notion of leadership from a lot of the foundations that support debate. And I think those foundations should continue to support debate, and we should continue to extract from those foundations to support it. But I think that once you get the public involved, once you say this is a policy, then it's a public affirmation of a critical community, a conversation-based community. And I think that I just think that that's priceless, and is really a really big part of it. And I think that, and there's a lot more to say about how that could be implemented really well. But I think that it's to me it would be almost revolutionary if we were able to replicate that model and reproduce that model in a lot of other spaces where private foundations and other groups have not even, kind of tried to go into, because there's just not a big enough market, because even the nonprofit industrial complex needs markets in order to, kind of function. And I'm thinking about the parts of Maryland where it's going to do the most good, are going to be in rural spaces, I think.
Mm-hmm. So you've kind of talked about how debate can create leaders who are more focused on community building and community organizing. What happens to a society that doesn't have these debate skills widely distributed or taught?
Mm-hmm. I think we're kind of seeing that in some ways, and I am I'm a fierce proponent of debate education is better than no debate education. And so I don't want to knock the way that we often teach debate or often foster debate. I think that it's necessary to create new forms and to evolve it a little bit. But one of the things that I would say is that if you're engaged in good debate, you're engaged in organizing. And if you're engaged in bad or spectacle-based or intimidation-based or evasion-based debating, then you're disorganizing and you're practicing a kind of authoritarianism and a kind of discursive violence that that I think that it's important to make those to kind of make those distinctions. And so I think that on the one hand, we've allowed as an American society and very knowledgeable voices have kind of documented how the public sphere has just sort of been chipped away. What we did have even post-war in the post-war economy and prior to the systemic stripping away of wages and public spaces and public monies and all of that, even that has gone away. And as and then the other part of that is that I'm not sure that we've always been really conscientious about how debate education could fill in those gaps or kind of make up for those. And so, I would say that we need, and I think that again, I think that the reason that public that public affirmation and that sort of public mandate is important is that it it becomes an activity that has to be inclusive and that has to work for everyone, whereas kind of leaving it to private interests means that that is not necessarily a mandate and that can't necessarily be fixed. And so I think that we need debate spaces that affirm that kind of public commitment. The very fact that we would say this is part of an official program, kind of says every voice is important. It's implicit in the model itself.
Yeah, and I think it's like I don't know if you saw the segment where we were talking about the civic engagement platform. It includes debate, but it also includes deliberative town halls. It includes doubling the library budget because we need to create those spaces where people can engage in this type of thing, both in structured ways and in community. And I think
that revival of the public sphere. I think that's sort of a. It's kind of a liberal idea, right? And so, so like sometimes people, who are very grassroots, kind of say, well, what do you exactly mean by, public deliberation? That sounds very, sort of liberal and idealistic and, and kind of old school, but I think that, there are things about the old school that were all right. We had, at the turn of the century, in the 19th and 20th century, there were more civic spaces, than there were by the end of the 20th century, and many of those were debating societies where things like women's suffrage and things like civil rights and things like labor rights and things like that were discussed among stakeholders that had differences of opinion, but all of whom wanted to better society. And that to me, I think is another sort of key difference between, what I would call, really valuable debating and the kind of spectacle-based debating that is literally often framed as exactly the opposite. Who can we exclude? I think we should exclude trans people from public spaces. Prove me wrong. Is a very, very different, kind of premise, right? Then how can we get together and create good, inclusive public spaces, as a starting point for a question? And so, I just think that having public debate programs makes it more likely that will, that those conversations will have space to grow rather than conversations about, hey, I don't think you should exist. Prove me wrong. And I realize that's a somewhat hyperbolic way to characterize these debates, but I do think that that's sort of the logic of the spectacle model of debate.
You can be hyperbolic on here, Matt. It's okay.
Yeah.
We need more hyperbole.
My doctor says that I should only be hyperbolic like 5 times a week, and I constantly run up against that limit. So
we'll try to. Well, we hope we don't get you in trouble with your doctor tonight.
Yeah,
but
sure.
And I think I want to switch to the AI topic that you brought up for a second in a moment, but I want to go back to this point that you made about the public investment in these skills, because the people in the private schools or the people that have access to the private or sort of generational funding of these things, these folks are able to use these skills. The military academies are able to use these skills. The folks that are going on to big law, big tech, big finance, and careers in the military and careers in the advocacy industry, because they have a solid pipeline from where they grew up and the zip code they went to and the school they went to, are getting investments of these skills. And the public investment in these skills is making sure that a kid from West Baltimore or somebody from Western Maryland or somebody from Frederick or somebody from Utah who may not have had access to these skills otherwise gets the public investment in this kind of education. And I think that's a really core piece of what our vision of this is. And I really appreciate you calling that out, because these skills are valuable. They're important, and you see them all through the highest levels of the people who are making decisions about our lives every day. And we need to make sure that we're investing public dollars and making sure that the other folks can exert influence against that.
Yeah. And I would be remiss if I didn't, give my usual spiel and honestly hope that debate educators and other debate educators maybe might be hearing this conversation as well, to say that there's a lot of these tech startups, many of which have funding, have pretty nefarious funding sources, are pushing debate products onto classrooms and onto teams and onto both public and private debate organizations, and they are there's a lot of AI based stuff, a lot of stuff that promises to kind of bypass the dialectical part of debate education in that process, and that even if some of those things might be good models, they have a sort of promo the model, and then later on once you're hooked into it, then you're going to then it's going to cost more, and they can't really help doing that, because they're going to have to eventually pay the piper, as we all know. A lot of these projects are going to have to pay off their investors sooner or later. Yeah. And so but the end result of that from a coaching standpoint is that you are bombarded with AI propaganda about how we can facilitate these debates, and including there's some crypto, some kind of crypto guy that's got some kind of app that's a debate app, and to have these sort of contest debates, these sort of game show kind of debates and stuff like that. And I'm not even sure what the whole story is, but there's a lot of stuff out there. And I think that this is what happens when we don't have democratic spaces. This is what happens when we don't constantly push to democratize and make public our educational spaces. Is that there's these sort of invitations to come back in, and I am sure that there are some really, really good applications that will come from advances in LLM technology and artificial intelligence. I'm sure there are, but we have to be in the driver's seat, and stakeholders need to be in the driver's seat for that to happen, including educators.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we will be releasing in our labor and education policy that is coming out soon is safeguards against outsourcing public sector jobs to AI and safeguards against undercutting, education professionals and other public sector professionals with these technology tools. As we've talked about on this show, I believe that these technology tools can be used in ways that help build a more democratic society, help build deliberative spaces, but they have to be done with that intention instead of being done with the sort of intention to create extractive economies and to create, domination economies. And so it's like, it is not a question of, sometimes I think this gets boiled down to, it's just a tool. And it is like, for me, it is not that question. It is, what is the world order you're trying to create by deploying and using this tool? Is it one that is extractive, or is it one that is cooperative? Is it one that is domineering, or is it one that is deliberative? But yeah, I think that we've been having these AI conversations going on a lot. And I think that this is a useful contribution to it here, to think about like how it interacts with this activity. And I think it's fascinating because there's some ways where it could be really good at this activity. It's about processing a lot of information. It's about helping folks summarize things. There's some ways that I could see a vision of this that was helping students at the poorest schools in West Baltimore and Western Maryland or something like that to be able to do research that competed that competes with folks at the richest schools in Montgomery County. But there's other ways in which, if that is not oriented toward a public, discursive, deliberative, dialectical debate, then it's not going to be any good. And so, I think this is stuff that we'll explore throughout this. But thank you for your take on some of those AI things. I'll kick it over to Owen for the next question.
Yeah, so we're getting into the economic side of debates, which is really something that is new to me, but I'm soaking it all up. And I know, Matt, you've also worked extensively in cooperative economics, including public banking, worker ownership, solidarity economy, which again is part of our platform. We love to see those synergies. How do you see debate and democratic deliberation connecting to economic democracy?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think keeping in mind that good debate is a kind of organizing, and that good debate can only happen when people feel safe and secure, and that when great asymmetries exist that underwrite the differences in those arguments, right? It's those asymmetries that are creating sort of the material foundation for some of those differences in opinion or perspective. But you're not getting the best in that in those contexts, and that when some people who come to the table are debating about their next margin, their next tax margin, and the other people are debating about whether they will have a place to live, and that my favorite example of this, I think the most important salient example, evergreen example of this, is simply that oftentimes in debate, we teach students that good ideas win. And if you go out into the political material world, you realize the number of times that good ideas do not win because they are bypassed, argumentatively bypassed, if you will, by material power. And so I think that in building cooperative spaces, economically and materially, we're sort of laying the material foundation for cooperative discussions. And in other words, discussions, where that do not occur amidst these serious asymmetries of power and these serious differences where it's almost impossible to have a debate in good faith under those circumstances. And so I feel like the struggle for a more equal world materially is baked into the struggle for discursive democracy, which to me is the foundation of debate.
So we're getting toward the end here, and I want to ask one last question. One last question we have, and then if there's anything you have to say, we can cue that up. But Matt, what is one big thing you're looking forward to in 2026?
I was hoping that you would. Obviously, I'm looking forward to the Buffalo Bills winning their first Super Bowl in 2026. I'll tell you what I am looking forward to in a very broad sense, because I don't want to get into a lot of the projects that people can learn a little bit more about if they go to my LinkedIn page. But I think that the thing that I am looking forward to is that there is a great turning coming. There is a great assemblage coming. A bunch of things are going to happen politically on a mass level. They are not always going to be in perfect harmony with each other, but I think in 2026 we're going to see some of the most amazing and unprecedented and inspiring displays of human solidarity that maybe we've ever seen. And I just feel that from the bottom of my heart, and am constantly inspired and in awe of what people show me every single fucking day. And have felt that way for a few years now, but certainly have felt that way over the last year, and continue to feel like that. I think that it's easy for folks to doom scroll and kind of go, oh, we're doomed. People are terrible. Man, I've just seen so many instances that that's not true. And what I'm seeing right now is a great building of forces and a great realigning of forces. And I think that's what we're going to continue to see in 2026 on maybe an unprecedented level.
Yeah, beautifully said. I'd say I've seen that doom scroll response, and I've seen that the best we can do is respond and try to take care of each other. And I really hope we see in 2026 is dreaming and imagining and building new alternatives and new realities, because we can't only be responding to all the terrible things all the time.
For sure. Yeah, if we really want to take care of each other, we've got some discussions to have about that.
Right. And we can't take care of each other in this system, right? We need a new system. We need a new world. We need a systems change that is rooted in values and ethics like peace, democracy, justice, and ecology, cooperation, collaboration, and dialecticals, because otherwise we're going, we can see where we're going. We can see the path we're on if we don't have the ability to have the gathering of those forces that you're talking about and a change. And I think I love the optimism in some of the darkest days, it feels like, because that's perhaps most when we need that vision of something better and the knowledge that it's happening, that you're seeing it every day, that as we travel around the state, we're seeing it all the time. And to know that there are a lot of people who know it can be better, they know it will be better, and know they will be part of making it better. And so,
well, I'm happy to talk about the role that debate plays in that, because I think it's really important to keep in mind that, debate itself, again, real debate itself is based on the cooperation of showing up, the cooperation of saying, I'm going to be part of this process and I'm going to speak. And so those are the things that we want to magnify as educators, as well as, as public activists.
Excellent way to put it, Matt. Thank you so much for being our first guest of 2026. It's going to be a great year. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have a lot of really good debates. And I think you give us the spirit and the energy that we need in order to enter this year with the kind of approach to our debates, our discussions, and our dialogues that we need to have. I never got to actually... I got to work with you as a coach, but I never got to be a student that was coached by you. And it was one of the things that I kind of missed, but I do love that I get to be a candidate and a speaker and an advocate who gets to benefit from some of your coaching. And I really appreciate that you were here tonight.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, and Happy New Year, guys.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye, Matt.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
So yeah, I thought that was really good. What did you think?
A lot to chew on there. I'm going to have to rewatch that section. And, Matt's got so much wisdom. And I think the way he talks about debate as organizing is important, because I think sometimes organizers want unity all the time, and consensus, like the quick mix consensus, and sometimes you got to be willing to debate even within your coalition or within folks who have some shared vision with you, in order to know where you really fall on the issues or how you want to proceed.
Yeah, totally. And I think that I'm really glad we put this show together the way we did. We were having some discussions ahead of time about like how to deal with all the heaviness that is in the world, and whether this feels consequential or not. Like, was this thing that we're doing consequential when we see what the world we're facing is? And I think the answer is decidedly yes, it is, because we need to have a different way of discussing, debating, and deliberating if there's any hope that there's going to be a democratic solution to the authoritarianism and fascism that we see all around us. And this campaign is a good way for us to demonstrate that and advocate it at the same time. One of the things that I love most about some of the most innovative debate arguments that I got to work with is that they were performing and demonstrating what they were advocating. And I think that tonight's show is a good example of how we can do that. And it can help people to understand that this is part of the coming together that Matt is talking about, that we need to have if we're going to overcome the fascist authoritarians in both parties and build the Maryland we deserve, so that people can thrive and have, and we can build a better world.
Absolutely. Yeah. What the work we do is important. And, if we're constantly in a spiral of response, we need to address what's happening on a daily basis in the material world. And we need to continue doing our work and not be thrown off course every single day.
Yeah. So this is a great show. I'm really excited to start 2026 with this. I was still having a little bit of holiday lethargy coming into this week. And when I talked to Seth today, I had a good conversation with Seth. He's like, when you do the show tonight, the energy is going to come back. And the energy has come back. I'm super excited about the work that we're doing. Next week, we're going to have, you booked our guest for next week. So why don't you preview it for us?
Yeah, sure. So tune in next week. We have former delegate Shane Robinson from Montgomery County, who for multiple terms was one of the most important progressive voices in the Maryland House of Delegates, and who, on his way out, changed his registration and became Green, and was our first Green member of the Maryland General Assembly. He's now doing really important education work. And we're excited to kind of talk to him both about how we can, just as we did with Matt, dream and imagine and build alternatives, and we can get some juice from him on how the Maryland General Assembly really works, because we're going to have the debate bill and maybe some other legislation to talk about as we campaign. We're also going to be advocating and working the legislative process.
Yeah, and I'm going to be down there in Annapolis next week for the for the first day of the General Assembly. We're going to go and hang out with the lobbyists and the electeds and the press. And so if you're there, check us out. And check out some of the events that we have. GoGreen2026.com events. We're going to be adding a lot of events to that, especially as you come to the Invite Us page and have us come out. So it's great. It's a strong start to 2026. We need it more than ever. And I think I'm good for the night. How about you? Are you ready to sign off?
Yeah, I wanted to put one last plug in. We've got the end of our campaign finance reporting period coming up next week. So this is an opportunity to show that we have more than 100 Maryland donors, and more than that, including out-of-state donors. So please, if you can contribute in the next couple of days, it'll count, because this is our first opportunity to make a splash and show that we're building a vibrant grassroots campaign. So I think it's the 13th or the 14th is when the reporting period ends, right, Andy?
Yeah, next week. The 14th, I think so. Like, get those donations in by Tuesday night of next week. Anything we have shows our strength and our credibility as we're moving toward the goal. One of the key things about this is we need to move to 1,500 donors and $120,000. And so any one donor is further along than not having that donor. So as Matt says, debate education is better than no debate education. Any donation is better than no donation. So this is what we're going to need to be able to do to take these ideas, to take them to scale, to make sure that we can reach folks. So if you can, please kick it in. We also want to be able to bring some good people on board to help us do this work, because Owen and I can do a lot of it, but we can't do all of it. So gogreen2026.com, donate. Whatever you can kick in is helpful. Helps fuel a people-powered campaign that is trying to rewire our democracy so that we can thrive and so we can have the Maryland we deserve.
Yeah. Peace.
All right. Peace.